In this video, let's learn about using AsParameters attributes to group parameters. So far, when we learned about the binding, the model binding, we have used only one parameter here. Okay, so get employee, and then we're getting the parameter from the header, or I can say binding this ID to the HTTP header. But what if you have different information from the HTTP request and they all need to be extracted and put into .NET objects? Okay, for example, let's delete this one, and then let's say that ID comes from the root parameter. Okay, so ID over here, I can provide a constraint, and also for some reason, we require the user to provide name, which doesn't actually make sense in this case, but just for demonstration purpose, we require the user provide the name from the query string. So I can say from query, and name is, I need to specify the data type here. Okay, name from the query string. And also, we need the user to provide the position from the header. So from header, string type, position. And over here, we can use the ID, name, position any we want. So for example, I'm going to do some weird thing. I'm going to get the employee information directly from the repository, and then I'm going to actually update the name to match the name provided through the parameter here. And I'm going to update the position to use the position from the parameter. Okay, so this is no doubt going to work. We just need to make sure that everything comes from the correct place. So let's run the application. And because we're going to use header, so I have to use Postman here. So we're hitting the correct root template. The position comes from the header. So I'm going to provide position header over here. And then here, I'm going to just say developer. And the query, we can add it over here, or we can add it over here. So I'm going to directly add in the URL here, and I'm going to say name equals, let's say, James. Right? James actually doesn't exist in our data store, but I'm just going to use James. And in this case, we also need to provide the ID. Let's say ID number 1. Okay, ID number 1, which is John Doe, but we're going to update John Doe to James Doe. And let's try to get the information. So click on send. All right, so names is James Doe, position is now developer. Remember, John Doe, I don't think John Doe is a developer. Let's actually go to take a look at the code here. So John Doe is an engineer. So because we provided in the header, we provided position as developer, and therefore the name is updated to James, position is developer. We didn't update the salary. Okay, so now you can see that we indeed can provide information from different parts of the HTTP request and bind them or extract them to our .NET objects. However, the only problem you see in our code here, let's go to program.cs, and let's see, we have just so many different parameters, especially this is only 3, and sometimes you have 4, 5, 6, and each one of them come from different source. It doesn't actually matter whether each one of them come from a different source or the same source. It's just that there are too many parameters, and sometimes it's better to group them together. And how do we group them together? We can create a data structure, whether it's class or struct, doesn't really matter, or even C# record, doesn't really matter. You can just group them together. So for example, let's scroll down and let's try to group them together with a class here. So let's say class, and what do I say? Let's say get employee parameter, just call it this way, and then we're going to say we have ID and we have name. Of course, we're going to have our position. All right, ID, name, position, and over here we can specify the data source. So this one come from root, and this one come from the query. Of course, this one comes from header, but you don't have to specify the data source from root or from query as long as the name corresponds, just as what we mentioned in the previous videos. But here for position, because it comes from header, we have to specify it. Okay, so once we have this structure, we can use this right here. So instead of using 3 parameters here, what we can do is we can use 1 parameter, which is get employee parameter, and we can just say param. Okay, and we need to specify as parameters. And when we do this, ASP.NET Core sees this as parameters. It's actually going to replace this class with the properties over here. So when we are writing this, it is as if we're writing the 3 different parameters as before. So writing the class name like this is the same as this, right? So that's why this attribute is called AsParameters. It's basically saying that this looks like a class, but it's actually parameters, right? You're actually creating parameters that corresponds to different parts of the HTTP request. Now, you can use it right here, like this, ID, and then like this, name, and then you provide the position. So param.position. Okay, and let's give it a try again. Let's run it, and let's go to Postman and James. Let's actually call it James Bond. I don't know whether Bond is written like this, but I'm just going to use it. We can specify even the space here. So click on send. Now we get James Bond, position developer. Let's actually update the position. I have to change it to agent, otherwise it looks weird, very weird. Okay, James Bond agent, salary is too low. But anyways, you can see that AsParameters is an attribute that help us to simplify the parameters. Right? We're grouping all of the parameters inside a class here. And again, this doesn't have to be a class. You can even change this directly to struct, like this. Right? Change this to struct and run it again. It's going to work exactly the same. So James Bond agent, let's update this agent from a lowercase a to a uppercase a, just to be more appropriate. All right, so you can see that this is updated. So this is how AsParameters works. Right? You're using a class or a struct, but it is as if you're using parameters. And that's everything I want to talk about in this video. I will see you in the next one.